Hello, my name is Brendan Beirne, and I'm going to be walking you through a little description of narrative structure today. So basically, this is a little mini lesson that gets at the question of how stories work. Um, and is inspired by Joseph Campbell, who was an English professor at Sarah Lawrence College in the 70s. And he wrote this really influential book called The Hero of a Thousand Faces. And the point of that project was to determine whether or not there was a kind of underlying grammar to how stories work. Um, and this was based out of Noam Chomsky's work that established that there was a kind of universal grammar to language. So Campbell was trying to see if that could extend to narrative itself. And so what he did is he studied about 5,000 world myths, including ancient myths from all over the world, different languages, and categorized them and decided that yes, there actually is a structure that repeats itself. It's all over the world and in different centuries through time. Interestingly, George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, was very influenced by Campbell's work, and he incorporated a lot of the ideas into Star Wars in a fairly obvious way. You can see a lot of the influence of Campbell on Star Wars. Okay, so this little map here is going to be the roadmap that our typical hero will take throughout a journey. Obviously, no story conforms to this perfectly, but it gives you a framework that you can kind of slot individual works of art into. And the better you know this, the better you're able to predict what's going to happen in a story. And in the context of, let's say, an SAT reading passage, it's very helpful in giving you accurate expectations of what should be happening next or where a particular piece of information should be found in a story. Okay, so sometimes I think of it as like the 9 innings of a baseball game. If you're trying to locate a specific moment, you can think about like, well, where would it happen in a story? And so we've got these different points, and it's going to help us locate various pieces of a story. So we start out with what's called the status quo ante. Most of you would probably know the term status quo. That just means the kind of normal situation, and ante means before. So let's say in a cop movie, a lot of times you might begin with two guys playing racquetball in a gym. And this might seem a little weird, like this is supposed to be an action movie or a thriller with lots of exciting or horrific moments, but it will start off in a kind of mellow vibe, right? And this is just to establish the world that the narrator lives in. Like, what does the everyday normal world look like? Then that's going to get disrupted, and I call it an issue rather than a problem, because just to convey that it's usually not a huge problem. It's a problem that the hero expects to be able to solve. So if we had our homicide detective, he might get a text message in the locker room at the gym that there's been a dead body found and he needs to come deal with it. This is obviously not a good thing, but it is kind of in the normal course of his work. And he expects to be able to deal with it in the normal way. Okay, so at that point, the hero will try solution number one. And there's 3 terms I wanted to introduce here. Resistance, sacrifice, and wisdom. So solution number 1 represents the hero's idea of how to overcome the problem, but still with quite a degree of resistance involved. So what will happen is they're going to kind of use their old bag of tricks and try to solve the problem, and it's not going to work, right? And we know this. Like, if you go to a movie that's 90 minutes long, and in minute 12 we have our hero trying to solve their problem, it's not going to get solved in minute 12, or else everyone would be asking for their money back, right? So solution number 1 is going to fail. And now we have like a real problem. We get a little more intense frowny face here. I don't think you can really see it, but it introduces doubt into the hero's mind, because he's sort of realizing that, my normal tools that I use to solve these problems don't seem to be working, but I also am resistant to change, and I would prefer not to have to like go outside of my comfort zone or anything. So what do I do? And at this point, a lot of times we get the introduction of a magic helper. So in Star Wars, there are many of these, but one of them is Yoda. It's probably the most famous one. It would oftentimes be someone who's kind of outside of normal society. So like a blind man or a drunk or a homeless man sitting on a park bench. In Macbeth by Shakespeare is the three witches that give Macbeth a prophecy that he's going to become a great king, right? And the problem that the hero has with the magic helper, which he or she is not aware of, is that they are not yet ready, mature enough, or prepared to understand the advice that the magic helper gives us. So in Star Wars, Yoda speaks in that weird syntax where he kind of reverses phrases. And this is a great solution by George Lucas to a problem because he wants the audience to be able to understand what Yoda is saying. But Luke Skywalker is supposed to have trouble understanding what Yoda says. Okay, and similarly, Macbeth misunderstands the witch's prophecy. He takes them literally instead of figuratively. Okay, so they try out solution 2 using what they think is the advice the magic helper is giving them, and that doesn't work either. And so now this is a kind of drastic descent into the pit of despair, right? And our hero, this is supposed to be flames, kind of like a hellscape. The hero then really doesn't know what to do. And so, you know, their original idea didn't work. The free help that they got from the helper didn't work either. And now they've got to figure out things on their own. And so this involves sacrifice or compromise. So like in the example of the homicide detective trying to solve a murder, let's say he's a kind of old school police detective who goes by gut and intuition, and he's a little bit phobic of new technology. And let's say he has a young woman partner who's very tech savvy, she's a programmer, and she's saying we need to use data science to figure this stuff out. And he's very resistant to that. This is the point at which the hero starts to think, okay, maybe I'm gonna need to like give up a few things, a few strongly held beliefs, do some hard work, accept help from other people, admit some humility, like admit that I don't have all the answers. In film, this often takes place in a montage sequence in which we might see like in 1 minute development that is supposed to represent an entire year. So in Taxi Driver, great Robert De Niro film, there's a montage sequence in which this guy is tired of being beaten up and bullied, so he starts doing push-ups and like punching a heavy bag, and he shaves a mohawk into his hair, and by the end of that montage sequence, he's a completely different person. Like he's real tough and very determined, whereas before he was kind of wimpy and uncertain of himself. So this belongs to kind of, begins the long march. This guy's kind of crawling uphill. It's often kind of painful. In a film, we would be in Act 2 and getting into Act 3, where he's going to face a lot of challenges. So, this might be kind of building some skills, finding some teammates, admitting some faults, right? Essentially, this process of growth and trying to kind of slough off old ways that are no longer working for him and gain some new ways that might be more helpful. So he eventually crawls his way up. There's going to be challenges along the way, but eventually he builds these new skills and acquires these new tools. That's what the sword is supposed to represent here, and he's got a cape, right? He's now able to fly, and he takes on the final boss man, as in a video, and finally defeats the villain, which may be an internal villain. It could be a problem with his own psychology. It could be an external villain as well. But he achieves the mountaintop here, and he has now achieved some wisdom. He's at a higher vantage point than he was at the beginning. And so this structure shows how we move from resistance to wisdom via the path of sacrifice. And the message of Campbell's framework here is that stories are sorry, I blacked out there. Stories are essentially information vessels, right? That they're ways that cultures pass on wisdom to the next generation, and so they're not just kind of blind entertainment. They're actually trying to give people information about how to improve their lives and how to solve problems. So that's the hero's journey. You should look for it next time you watch a movie or read a story. It's all over the place. It's practically unavoidable. And a lot of times, if you don't like a story, like if you walk out of a movie, if you think about it, it's probably violating one or more of these rules. I say rules loosely. They're obviously not like hard and fast rules, but they're general guidelines. And if you ever take a screenwriting class, you'll see that film in particular as a genre is fairly strict about these rules. Like it's very hard to sell a screenplay if you don't have a conflict in the first 20 minutes, right? Audiences don't want to wait an hour to find out what challenge the hero is facing. So this can help you creatively, and I think it can really help you interpreting books that you have to read and any kind of text that you're dealing with. If you think about the ways in which the story is conforming to the hero's journey, and then also the ways that it departs, right? Because no story fits this perfectly, and it's often very interesting the ways in which stories kind of take a twist on Campbell's basic structure. So that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to talking to you in the next class. Thanks.